So, Mark, I just saw the new Oliver Stone movie on George W. Bush called W. Yesterday I saw it, and I think you saw it last week or so.
Yes,
and I was wondering what are your thoughts on this movie?
Well, that's a great question. I just want to just note the timing, because time is always important in Hebrew wisdom, as we both know. And in Hebrew wisdom, Zman, the word time means invitation. So as we're talking now, the results of the elections are coming in, the Obama-McCain race. It looks like, as you said on the phone a few minutes ago, it looks like Obama is going to win comfortably, although we're not quite sure yet. Things could still lopside, but unlikely. We're just not quite sure what the margin of the win is, which means that really we're at the end of the Bush era.
Yes.
That's where we're talking about George W. Bush, and the two times that you talk about a person, is always at the day of their birth, also the end of their era. So this isn't a physical death for George Bush, but it's it's the end of an era, so it's really an appropriate time kind of to look back and to think about him. And so Oliver Stone's movie. I mean, just a couple of thoughts. There were three ways to go. There's three ways to go when you make a movie about a person. You and I talked, I think, a couple of weeks ago about what the job of a biographer was, right? Which is really the same question. That in some sense, Oliver Stone was acting as a biographer, right? He was telling the story of somebody else's life and trying to understand who this person was. I just want to say briefly and pass it back to you that there are really three things you can do. You can or really four things, right? One is you can demonize the person, right? Mm-hmm. Two is you can canonize the person, right? Either they're completely evil or they're completely fantastic, right? Demonization, canonization, right? Bush has enjoyed in many circles in the last year or so, enormous demonization. Obama has enjoyed canonization. But, those are the first two choices of a biographer, right? The third choice is that you make the person look stupid, right? That you don't quite demonize them, but you mock them implicitly, right? Yeah. Mockery, And the fourth choice is to really hold the complexity of the person. And the fourth choice is, of course, the honest and deep, and the opposite of the holy is the superficial. So I think it's the choice of depth. It's the holy choice. Living a deep life, it's the choice of depth. So, Oliver Stone, here, people have kind of lauded him for the movie, but the reason they lauded him was because he didn't take the choice of demonization. That's true. He didn't take that choice, but he did take the choice of mocking.
Yes.
Right. And that's and it's basically he essentially dismissed George Bush. He didn't want to dismiss him through demonization, so what he did is he dismissed him through mocking. And he kind of painted, Dick Cheney as the devil, Colin Powell as kind of the good guy who was basically impotent, Condoleezza Rice as, essentially a, kind of glorified, yes woman secretary.
Yes.
And in that sense, Oliver Stone did a bad job. He did a bad job because the opposite of the holy is the superficial. That is to say, George Bush and the people around him actually, particularly, the ideas that he represents, moving beyond the person, actually have depth. Whether you agree with them or disagree with them is a completely separate issue. But they have depth, they have complexity, right? And to paint them as stupid or as ridiculous, right, to mock them, is actually inappropriate. It's kind of like roasting George Bush, but unlike a roast where the person has the possibility of responding, right? Bush didn't get the right to respond. So that's really what I feel. I feel like in the four choices of the biographer, he chose, let me mock him. And that, to mock a person is a way of dismissing them. Maybe the last sentence and turn over to you. The Talmud says that the one place in the world that mockery, right, is considered acceptable and appropriate, the Talmud in Tractate Megillah in 25a, right, is in the case of idolatry. Why? It says all mockery is forbidden except for the mockery of idolatry, because mockery is a way of destroying something. Laughter undermines and destroys something, particularly mocking. And so I thought it was actually a destructive movie, but in a particularly insidious way. In other words, he avoided the charge of demonization, but replaced it with mockery. That's my kind of first take.
Yeah, I was watching the movie and I was thinking, what am I going to say about this? Right. It's not quite ringing real for me, but I wasn't thinking of the word demonizing, but that is the word. He's not demonizing W. Bush. It's just not ringing real for me. And then as the movie kept going and there were all these scenes of him eating,
right,
just
horrid. They're right.
Yeah, it's just focused so much on him stuffing his face, and just that huge gross appetite, and okay, and then I realized, yeah, it's just making fun of him as as best goofy, but really as a fool, and like when you read great literature, it shows the complexity of life, and it gives you insights into how life is lived, and this was like a satirical look. It was taking what is small and making it big. And rather than taking what is big and focusing on that. Like, I think George W. Bush will go down in history based on whether or not Iraq turns out well. If Iraq turns out well, then everything else that he's bungled will look small in comparison. And if Iraq turns out badly, and that can be attributed to him, then everything that he's done that is good will not count much. Like, he's made the biggest gamble in American political histories, launching a preemptive war, and so to me the most fascinating story about George W. Bush is how did he come up with the courage to pursue the surge against all popular notions, against, all the elite said that the war was lost, and to me that's the fascinating part. What I will say for the film is that it held my interest. I was sorry when it ended. Like, even though it was 2 hours, 2.5 hours, I was sorry when it ended. I wanted to keep going. I thought it was like a bold topic to take on in a movie, and he kept my interest, and I kept wanting to know where it was going, and I felt like, in some ways, even though it was a put down and a mockery of Bush, I also did feel like I was there in the room when history was taking place.
Right.
And so, did you enjoy it? Like, at least did it keep your interest through the whole thing?
Right. Now, it's actually a really beautiful point. That you've made like 3 or 4 different, each distinct points. But let's start with the last one, which I think, just as from an artistic perspective, and art's something that's, beautiful. Art's a real thing. And I think I actually also tip my hat to Oliver Stone. The movie was compelling, is the word I would use.
Yeah.
But it was compelling, and like you, the movie was over to actually like almost too soon. Like,
yes.
At the end of the movie, like you felt like, you actually had that feeling at the end of the movie that you actually wanted another half hour. Like, what actually happened? And it's because the wrap up, kind of, realizing that Iraq didn't quite go well, was all happened very, very fast. So the last like 15 minutes of the movie, packed an enormous amount. You actually felt like you needed another 15 minutes. You wanted, it's that actually he did accomplish. It was a compelling artistic movie, and the other thing is that even though it was mocking, it did evoke some compassion. It clearly evoked. It mocked in a particular kind of way. In a way which still, and that was actually was very, very skillful about the movie. It still allowed one, even if a person would be a radically anti-Bush kind of person, it actually evoked some kind of compassion and empathy for Bush. So in that kind of strange sense, in kind of, very vociferously anti-Bush, incarnate Satan, liberal circles, which are very, very strong in America. It's those circles that, kind of finally constellated and carried Obama to victory. This movie actually didn't allow that. It didn't allow that kind of satanic portrayal of Bush, and it actually evoked some compassion. At the same time, maybe this is the major point I wanted to make, is, you pointed out the eating scene. And it's very, very interesting to notice how we mock a person. So what are the primary human functions, right? We eat, we're sexual. Eating and sexuality, those 2 primary kind of, functions that we share with the animal world, are the easiest ways to mock a person. For a simple reason, right? Because when you look at the experience of eating or sexuality without the experience of hunger or desire, right, which is the interior of the experience, it looks absurd, right?
Right.
Those are the 2 experiences. It's a point that I want to just, we said last time we talked, and one says something in the name of the person who says it brings redemption to the world. So actually, a writer named Warren